Oh, it's horrible. All right, I'm trying to go live. Not sure how the stream is going to work. I'm trying to tune in here, so let me give it a minute while while it streams. It's not easy to stream while traveling, so let's see what we get here. I see a few people joining in. This is going to be there we go. We got people logging in here to the chat. Just going to give it a minute. Streaming while on the road, never easy. Not something easy to do. Hopefully everything's running smoothly. Hey, what's going on? Glad you guys are joining in. Awesome. Glad to see some people popping on, and the stream is actually working. I was testing it out, and the upload stream wasn't even 1 meg, and the upload was 2 megs, and the download was about half. So I'm going to try to kick it off. Let's see who's logging in here. We got Robert Higgins. How's it going? Ceci, Bobby Wheeler, Doug Huff. Good to see you guys. Gunaholic, XRP Pajama. Awesome. We got here XRP Hollywood, Moneybags. What's going on? Glad you guys are able to join in. This is just a little bit out of norm for me, so I'm not used to streaming through this laptop, and B, not having my normal setup while I'm streaming. So, but you know what? There's a lot of great things to talk about, so I wanted to make sure that I logged in, that I actually continued with the live stream for a Monday evening. Probably going to keep it a little bit shorter this evening, but there were some key things that I wanted to cover that we didn't really get a chance to go through on Saturday on the live stream. So, anyhow, so I'm going to dig right into it because the SEC, and we talk a lot about regulatory clarity. We try to talk about what the SEC has to do in order to provide a framework of understanding for digital assets really to flourish and blockchain companies really to flourish in the U.S. market. And we see regulatory clarity popping up through SEC, through other in other countries. Let's say like in Thailand, and the SEC in Thailand that had made some important announcements when it comes to digital assets and blockchain technology. And we've all been waiting around to see what the U.S. SEC is going to do in order to provide some sort of a path of regulatory clarity here in the United States. So wanted to give a big shout out to DNI. DNI is probably still live streaming, didn't want to step in his space, but anyhow, a lot of credit to what DNI has been putting together over there out of Thailand. So, before we get into the SEC, I think this is important because an article just came out. Let me look for. Yeah, okay. DNI is actually getting ready to sign off. All right. So let me see here. Here we go. Okay, got a bunch of tabs open. It's kind of a different environment for me to be working out of here. So this I thought was important because this was just released a couple hours ago, and I pulled this article up on Cointelegraph, and this has to do with, again, we're focused in here on regulation, and one of the things that I've talked about, that we've all talked about, when it comes to regulations being passed in other countries, it actually does set the groundwork, does set a precedence for what other countries could potentially then adopt. And France is actually, and this is according to Reuters, France is pushing EU member states to adopt its cryptocurrency regulation. So now this was on Cointelegraph. So let's see, this was just reported. Now, France is reportedly going to try to convince other European Union members to adopt cryptocurrency regulations similar to its own. Now, what is important in that case then is to provide a streamlined acceptance of the digital asset space of the cryptocurrency marketplace throughout the EU. Now, here it says Le Maire reportedly said that he will. So here's his quote: he would propose to my European partners that we set up a single regulatory framework on crypto assets inspired by the French experience. Our model is the right one, he says. And so this comes down from, if we look back a month ago and we see what has been happening over in Switzerland. And so in the same article, it says here, the legislative body of the Swiss government, the Federal Assembly, approved a motion to instruct the Federal Council to adopt existing legislation for cryptocurrency regulation. Now, in that case, we see Switzerland moving more and more into normalizing digital assets and the exchange thereof. And we saw one of the leading financial exchanges in Switzerland beginning to trade in digital assets. And so now, if we start to see some sort of normalization throughout the EU, this also then sets a precedence. Now, obviously, we've been looking to see exactly what's going to be happening in the US market. So we don't have to look that far out if we're going to go over to the EU and start seeing some form of regulation, some form of acceptance as a standard across the European Union. So let me look over here. Who just logged in. We have Dan. Dan, how's it going? Glad that you're joining us. It's a little bit dry here. Cold weather. It was 37 when I arrived. So, all right. So then let's jump over to what the SEC is doing. I would love to be able to share my screen here, but I'm kind of limited in the technology that I can use with this laptop. But the SEC, and this I think is important because we are beginning to see baby steps within the U.S. government, within the SEC. We see, and we've talked about in depth at length in regards to the Token Taxonomy Act. Obviously, a step beyond that would be the SEC accepting and providing some form of regulatory clarity. On the SEC website, they have a framework for investment contract of digital assets. So to me, this has considerable meaning. So if the SEC is beginning to post on its own website information in regards to how to accept or how to work within the framework, utilizing digital assets as an investment vehicle. And the SEC is beginning to provide a little bit of guidance. It's not the guidance that we want, but they are starting to establish some guidance. So they start off here in their introduction. If you are considering an initial coin offering, sometimes referred to as an ICO, or otherwise engaging in the offer, sale, or distribution of a digital asset, you need to consider whether the U.S. federal security laws apply. So right in the beginning, the very first sentence on the SEC website, on this page, they're specifically pointing out and acknowledging the investment in initial coin offerings or in ICOs, and they're specifically addressing engaging in the offer, sale, or distribution of a digital asset. So now they're saying if you're going to do that, there are specific federal security laws that can apply to that. What's interesting is that as we go through the page, they do focus in on the Howey test again. And so before I get in, let me bounce back over here real quick. Here we go. Sorry, XRP Hollywood. You have a PBS. Let me just show this. Sometimes the links get blocked. Ripple tweeted new corridor now open. That's awesome. I just shared the link. Kevin Russell, do you think the IMF has hinted that XRP Ripple will be the reserve currency? Well, I know a lot of people are actually discussing the IMF, and there obviously have been people have been trying to address and really identify and explain what the IMF has really tried to insinuate when it comes to digital assets. We can read into it. I don't think that any of us really know exactly what their plans are, what they're going to do, whether or not they want to truly identify digital assets as a reserve currency. I think it makes sense that they begin to utilize digital assets. And I obviously, it's really been discussed at length by many other YouTubers on the different channels. I think we need to really sit back and wait and see exactly what's going to happen. We do see, though, some of the statements that are coming out across the board. And if you look at, who's lobbying, how they're lobbying, where they're spending their time. So if we see Coinbase spending a considerable amount of time on Capitol Hill, if we see Ripple spending a considerable amount of time on Capitol Hill, obviously something is going on in DC in regards to the digital asset space, and you see some of the bigger players that are in discussions. Now, the same thing, we would also be able to identify if we look at what's going on at the IMF level, and we want to look and see exactly what, which companies might be in closer discussion with the IMF. So if that's Ripple, then obviously there's a trend right now that's moving in this direction of governments really gaining more and more acceptance of digital assets. So let me just take a pause here. Brian Darcy, what's up? Glad you could join on. JRPB, what's going on? Moneybags, IMF and World Bank now have Learning Coin to train their staff. I think that's really think about the purpose of the IMF, of the International Monetary Fund, to really help and the programs that the IMF have in helping nations and floating credit when it's needed. So there's a lot of involvement from that perspective. If we look at a lot of the utility of where digital assets can go in terms of helping the unbanked become banked, helping the underserved flow of liquidity. There's really a lot that the IMF can do with the digital asset space when it comes to a reserve currency. And we see DNI has been talking about the ESDR. If you look at the SDR, I mean, there's a lot. You can get so in depth into it. And his live streams. Hey, Popcorn, how's it going? So let's just jump back over to the SEC and the statements that have come out of the SEC. So what I think is interesting is the focus point of what the statement from the SEC as it has to do with digital assets. And the true identifier for them is to look at whether or not a digital asset, the distribution of the digital asset, and if we look at the digital asset itself, to identify whether or not it's a security. So first and foremost, and I made a video about this, and I've talked about this a couple times previously, but it's really the application of the Howey test to digital assets. Now, if you go back and you really want to identify what the Howey test is, you think about the Howey test was actually a court case from 1946 time frame. It had to do with an orange grove and an individual who was selling off parcels of his land to investors with a promise that although they weren't farmers, he would continue to farm the land, sell the fruit from the oranges, sell the fruit from those plots, and based on the percentage of the overall total plot that they owned, the individuals invested in, they would get a percentage of all the proceeds from the sale of the oranges. Now, the Howey test itself is then applied to that case. case. It was derived from that case, and the test is relatively simplistic in that when you look at an investment, do individuals that, and here, let me read this statement here. And so, as noted above, under the Howey test, an investment contract exists when there is the investment of money in a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profits to be derived from the efforts of others. Whether a particular digital asset at the time of its offer or sale satisfies the Howey test depends on the specific facts and circumstances. We address each of the elements of the Howey test below. So again, this is the SEC. So previously, the SEC really hasn't dug in too deeply with a direct focus on their website anyways when it comes to digital assets. So here now there's a clear statement regarding digital assets, regarding ICOs, and hopefully it wasn't on my side. Ads Bohemian, GXRP, how's it going? Ads Bohemian, in a decade we should be sitting pretty. 5-10 years. It's going to take time. It definitely takes time. GXRP, I don't think XRP is a security, and that's kind of the direction that I wanted to go with this, is to extrapolate from the SEC statement of what they say, and then we want to apply it to XRP and some others. Money bags. Learning coin has no value, but it trains staff on digital assets, only used internally. We should see a learning coin in the US. I think that would be super helpful. The fact that they're using it at the IMF level and the World Bank level is extremely meaningful. Understanding of digital assets on a global level. So the preparedness at the IMF level and the World Bank level, the fact that they're practicing with it is really all telling. So it's not just a game that they're playing with. Yeah, that would be great if it was for the public too. You know, if there was a way to really drive up more identification to the mainstream. And so obviously it has to start somewhere. We see a huge, grassroots effort, focused. You have the early adopters, and now there's been this big, it's kind of a jump. We don't see mainstream adoption, yet we have the early adopters, and then it's going straight over to the IMF, the World Bank, and we see governments, starting to find ways to provide some form of regulation. And then you have others like China, like India, that have been taking extreme perspectives on digital assets. The state of New York, I think, is another example of providing extremely difficult regulation on the digital asset space. Let's see here. That's why it's called Learning Coin. That's right. GXRP, they've prepared for the Learning Coin. It was planned and made months in advance. It's not like Learning Coin came out of nowhere. Exactly. So this is something that, you're right. They don't just overnight, roll something like that out. And obviously there's some assumption of what they're going to want to be doing in the future. And obviously to gain some experience, to gain some comfort with, if they need to train their people across the board of working with these digital assets, and they don't want to play around. So they're not just going to all of a sudden give them real money to start working with, and they need to test every possible scenario of how they're going to transact with it. It would be really interesting to dig deeper to see how they're utilizing the Learning Coin. That's a great question, Moneybags, to really look and see who was behind putting that together for them. I think that would be an interesting case study. So here we go. So we go a little bit deeper into the SEC. And so they want to address specific elements of the Howey test. And as who just brought that up regarding GXRP. So GXRP. So now if we look at this, and I did this once before in a video, but I think it's great. We do this as a group. And we look at what the SEC is actually stating. So we have the first element of the Howey test, the investment of money. So here it states the first prong of the Howey test is typically satisfied in an offer and sale of a digital asset because the digital asset is purchased or otherwise acquired in exchange for value, whether the form of real or fiat currency, another digital asset, or other type of consideration. So it's already, you're investing money. So the fact that you're investing money is going to satisfy the Howey test outright. Where it really comes down to it again is going to be in the third part, which is the reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others. But before we go there, let's look at common enterprise. So courts generally have analyzed a common enterprise as a distinct element of an investment contract. In evaluating digital assets, we have found that a common enterprise typically exists. So it's interesting because, first and foremost, if we look at XRP as an example, let's go to GXRP and use XRP as an example. Individuals are buying XRP, you're investing, you're either exchanging other digital assets for it, or you're buying it directly with fiat currency. Now, if we go to, and I think it's actually more important to really jump right to the reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others, because this is really the key. This is the cornerstone of the Howey test. Hey, Spanish Fly, glad you could join us. Thanks for logging in. Let's see, Moneybags can't find an answer for that. I think it's got to be out there somewhere. We can keep looking. Crypto Bird Dog, what's going on? Glad to see you on. They keep these hotels like desert dry when it's cold outside. It's absurd. All right. So let's go back to the reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others. And this is really where, and really, I think this is a point that we really need to discuss a little bit more in depth. And this goes back to a lot of the questions that people have when it comes to the price point of XRP staying relatively flat, meaning it's in that 30 to 35 cent range. And everybody says, oh, with all the good news that's coming out from Ripple, there should be an expectation of an increase in the price point of XRP. Now, when it really boils down to it, again, XRP, isn't a share of stock. And if it was a share of stock, which would then be a security, you would have an expectation of a reward, of an increase in the price of, or the value of the stock, as based on the movement and the financial stats of the company. So if we were buying shares of stock in Ripple, we would then have a certain expectation of reward from the efforts of all those who work at Ripple. So being that XRP is not a security, it's not a stock, there should also not be an expectation that as there is good news or bad news, we're not going to see price movement necessarily with the XRP token. Now, from direct utility of the XRP token, from supply and demand, and then the need for XRP to be used in the cross-border payment space, there could then be an expectation of an increase in the valuation of the XRP token. So I think those are two things that really need to be clarified and really understood, because if there is a direct expectation that XRP is going to increase in value due to positive news coming out of Ripple, the company, then they could attempt to make a case that XRP is a security, because everyone holding XRP has an expectation of profit to share with all of the good news that comes out of Ripple. Now, on the other hand, if there is no expectation. Good news coming out is they're adding more and more partners that are utilizing their software protocol. They're utilizing RIP until XRapid goes fully live and they begin engaging the XRP token. Should there then be some form of an expectation of a rise in the value of XRP until time as the XRapid part of the equation goes live? So I think that's the interesting dynamic with all of this. 179 Kevin, do you think we're dumping because of all the FUD around wash trading on all the exchanges? Let's see here. What is, let me look at the current, let me just pull this up. I think it could be interesting. Let me pull up the current valuation. Hang on one second. Let's see. Let's pull up a current. I haven't honestly app or otherwise. All right, so we see a slight trend downwards over at least as it stands right now. Bitcoin down about 5%. You have Ethereum down 6%. XRP's down about 6%. Litecoin's down 10%. EOS 8%. Bitcoin Cash is down 10%. BNB is down 4%. I think there's a downward trend across the board in the market, up and down. It's crazy because I think that, and in some part, the markets are going to trend up and down strictly based on speculation by, certain news is going to push the market up and down. The market, at least in the top 10, let's say the top 15, maybe there seems to be a lot of interconnectivity between them. So as you see, if Bitcoin's being pumped, the others are going to trend up or down. It's interesting overall that XRP has had some mild movement, but then it stays relatively consistent. It doesn't have, it hasn't had a wide range of movement, whereas Bitcoin has now traveled up. Now it's sitting at $5,006, which it's interesting because it was, where was it, at like $3,800, $3,900 not that long ago when XRP was still sitting just under 30 cents. So was it around 25, 26 cents? Was it 27 cents? So it's had a little bit of a move. With every upward momentum, you're always going to have a little pullback, especially as people are going to attempt to take profits. If there's a little bit of negative news, then people are going to start selling off a little bit as well. I think it's a lot of what we're seeing is tied to the news, is tied to FUD and FOMO. It's emotional buying and selling in a lot of this. Maybe you have some additional feedback. The Saudi-India corridor, I haven't had a chance to read up in depth on the Saudi-India corridor, but overall, let me, not much info, only that it's a probably, you're still looking up the learning coin. Let's see, GXRP also wouldn't have IMF released multiple learning coins to learn how to deal with multiple assets. Do they really need multiples, or do they just need one learning coin? All right. So let me go back. Let me go back to the SEC statements here, and then I'll come back to the chat here in a minute. And this goes back to, again, XRP. So we focus in again on the reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others. So based on the statement here, goes back to the SEC statement, the reliance on the efforts of others. The inquiry into whether a purchase is relying on the efforts of others focuses on two key issues. Does the purchaser reasonably expect to rely on the efforts And are those efforts the undeniably significant ones, those essential managerial efforts which affect the failure of or success of the enterprise, as opposed to the efforts that are more ministerial in nature? So I think that, you know, and they really dive a lot deeper into all of this, and I think it gets a little bit too deep as they try to really identify, you know, the actions. But I think it's pretty straightforward. And this is another important part, which is the reasonable expectation of profits. An evaluation of the digital asset should also consider whether there is a reasonable expectation of profits. Now, profits can be, among other things, as they state here, capital appreciation resulting from the development of the initial investment or business enterprise, or a participation in earnings resulting from the use of purchasers' funds. Price appreciation resulting solely from external market forces, such as general inflationary trends or the economy impacting the supply and demand for an underlying asset, generally is not considered profit under the Howey test. So, I mean, you guys really need to go through and read this. It's pretty long. It gets a little bit involved, but at the end of the day, and this is really what I think is the most important part, and the biggest takeaway here is to identify when a digital asset is or isn't a security. And it says here in their conclusion, the discussion above identifies some of the factors market participants should consider in assessing whether a digital asset is offered or sold as an investment contract and therefore is a security. It also identifies some of the factors to be considered in determining whether and when a digital asset may no longer be a security. So the entire point here with the SEC is to identify whether or not an investment is going to be a security or not. And then you have to really extrapolate. So it's not providing clear guidance specific to a digital asset. At some point, someone's going to have to come out and make a statement as to whether or not a digital asset is a security or not. However, one of the things that the SEC does state is that there's some sort of an expectation that the company will approach the SEC and file and receive feedback one way or the other. So as a result of that, actually, let me see if I can find the article I pulled up. Here's one. Blockstack formally files $50 million token offering with the SEC. So when was this released? This was on the 13th. It says here, Blockstack Token LLC has formally filed with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to conduct a $50 million token offering. If accepted, it will be offered using the SEC Regulation 8+ framework and be the first SEC-approved token offering of its kind. And this is an ICO. So let me dig here. There was something. Blockstack is aiming to create a decentralized computer network with the help of scientists from Princeton. It would be a privacy-centric, with users being able to store their data. So it kind of gets into the description there. But what I thought was really interesting is that they're actually filing with the SEC to become the first SEC-approved token. And so whether or not they're going to be classified as a security, let's see what it says here. Would potentially be the largest SEC-approved ICO ever. It is likely that Blockstack's token offering will be counted as a security based on what they're trying to accomplish. Doesn't really get into saying specifically what they're trying to accomplish. As it stands now, the SEC has been woefully unclear about its requirements for token issuers and cryptocurrency crowdfunding. So I think that's interesting. I mean, this is all happening around the same period of time. And really, and again, we've talked about this so much that there has to be some form of regulatory clarity that's provided in order for this space to be more readily adopted at the mainstream level, and that's something. So if the SEC is still going to continue to tiptoe around it, but one of the statements that have come out of the SEC before is that they have stated that they would prefer that a company, if they're unsure as to whether or not they have a security or not, that they actually approach the SEC and find a way to work through the process. Now, at the same time, if the SEC does have an issue with a digital asset with an ICO, then they haven't hesitated either to go after them and to make sure that it was pretty clear that the company had issued a investment that should have been a security, and then they have to basically suffer the consequences as a result. But they do have a time to cure. Let's see, Moneybags. I wish SEC would just come out and say it like they did with Bitcoin. Exactly. So they made their statement with Bitcoin and Ethereum. What was their motivation behind that? They did finally, they came out with that statement. They need to come out, at least those within the top 5 or the top 10, just go down the list and make those statements. And it's interesting that those are the two that decided to single out right off the bat. 179 Kevin, I really think they know XRP will be powering the Internet of Things. They want us out of XRP. That's why we're not hearing anything. And that's always a possibility too. The powers that be, whether it's a digital asset or a stock, there seem to always be games that are being played with the retail investor for them to make their own determination as to whether or not, really to determine whatever outcome they want. So if they decide that it's better not to have us in, then they're going to try to find a way to get us out. It's that is interesting. That's an interesting perspective. So let me go through a few things here. Let's see. Now this one, this was the big news, and really I think it was kind of expected. I saw earlier Binance announced that they were going to delist Bitcoin SV. Now Shapeshift is delisting Bitcoin SV as of an hour ago, per Cointelegraph, and Kraken is also considering to delist SV. And let's see if anybody else is what's in this article. Let me see if there's anything else interesting in here. I just thought that was interesting. As you start to see, the split in the philosophies and all of that commotion that was really created over SV. And in the end, look, now they're just going to delist them. Let's see, GXRP, if Learning Coin is replacing BTC, the IMF would learn how slow and expensive BTC and say to hell with this. Yeah. Moneybags, I agree. I have a gut feeling it's XRP. It could be one single, and they did outright state that it was not BTC, right? I believe that they came out and said that. Now, what I find interesting, though, if you look at the SDR is a basket of 5 different currencies, and they added the Chinese yuan not that long ago. So year-wise, a couple years ago. So if you think about the fact that the SDR is a basket of currencies, it would almost stand to reason, they don't want to put themselves in a position where they're reliant on one specific digital asset. So it almost makes sense that if they're going to create some sort of a reserve currency, if it's going to be one specific currency, or are they going to attempt to also create a basket of digital assets similar to the SDR, but with a basket of digital assets versus a basket of fiat currencies. that way, obviously with XRP, even with XRP, is there still going to be some form of hesitancy from a World Bank perspective, an IMF perspective, a government perspective, that there could still be attempts at manipulation of the digital asset based on other power brokers? I don't know if I'm sure that goes into some form of consideration. That if you look at, and I don't know, that's a really deep, much deeper conversation to have, to think about, because you have certain power brokers, let's say, that are accumulating the U.S. debt, or are they accumulating U.S. fiat currency? Now, are there bad actors out there that would potentially want to dump U.S. dollars and see devaluation of the U.S. currency? I'm sure there are. Are they able to? Let's say if China decided they wanted to upset the U.S. economy, obviously it would have huge negative repercussions to the economy over in China. But if they didn't care about their economy and they just wanted to put it out there, could that happen? So could there be similar concerns? From just overall, I'm just thinking they're just like way outside the box when it comes to being reliant on, especially as an IMF or the World Bank, or looking at it from a reserve currency perspective. Do they want to be reliant on one specific currency? Now, I think that's the debate that we should have, and then really identify it as XRP, and look at XRP and dig in a little bit deeper as to the overall potential of XRP being utilized in the form of a reserve currency, from a global scale, and really identify as to whether or not XRP could be susceptible or not susceptible to overall manipulation. As, let's say, with a Bitcoin at this point could be manipulated through the holdings of these miners based out of China, or they make the big statements of how many who holds the conglomerate of mining operations for Bitcoin, and do they then control an overall larger percentage of the Bitcoin that's available? Can it then be manipulated overall? I think there's still a lot of things to consider, and we have to really weigh all sides of it, pros and cons. So, and I'm sure that's what the IMF and the World Bank is doing as well. Let's see, 179. They're going to have some fast something. Let's say they're going to have to have something fast talking AI when 5G grid rolls out, with the smart cars, smart homes, and smart electronics. Yep, that's definitely coming down the pipe, and that's where we see the micro payments in between electronics and machines. I think that's interesting. Stuart H. 2 commissioners have already said if a coin runs on its own network or blockchain, it is not going to be considered a security due to use case. XRP runs on RippleNet, XRapid, the ledger. Yep. So I think we're going to need more, and I think it's interesting. It's a positive overall. I think we're seeing a lot of positive signs, positive news, positive statements coming out of the SEC. It's just not enough, and it's not fast enough, and obviously, things don't happen at the speed that we want them to happen. At the same time, as we push for some sort of regulatory normalcy, and we see other countries around the world that are adopting and are moving in that direction. And on the live stream on Saturday, we drew a comparison between the foot dragging of the FDA when it comes to some things within the healthcare and the foot dragging that we're seeing with the SEC when it comes to digital assets, and which is from an investment perspective, but also from the blockchain company perspective. When it comes to the economy overall, we're talking about investment, we're talking about jobs, and we're talking about important technology that needs to really flow out of the U.S. instead of important blockchain technology that's fleeing to other countries to then be developed and expanded on. So there's just so much going on. But overall, as Stuart H., as you'd mentioned just now, we see commissioners coming out with positive news. We see this statement on the SEC website discussing digital assets, starting to create the framework. And I think that's what's really the most important thing, is that we're starting to see the base being built. Without that base, without the framework, there's really nothing. So even if it takes another year, another 2 years to really establish a solid foundation of understanding for digital assets in the United States, the precedent's going to be set globally. Even though we're starting to see global adoption, if we're starting to see, at least from a micro perspective, we start seeing the framework being constructed in the U.S. for a positive outcome, then I think we're at least headed in the right direction. Let's see, Stuart H. Given XRP's use case is regulated by the OCC and FinCEN, who they have to register with for banks, Ripple and XRP, too much regulation would stymie XRP and overlap. Don't want over-regulation. I think what we need is regulatory clarity so that at least there's an understanding, there's a framework of understanding of expectation. There's a commonality. As we talked about even on Saturday, when it comes to providing regulatory clarity, we don't live in anarchy, so we have to have a set of values, a set of understandings. And since we're operating on a government level and a global banking level and a global corporate level, in order for everything to function seamlessly, there has to be some form of expectation and setting the rules. And there has to be an acceptance of the rules. Now, if you have over-regulation and overzealousness, then you have an outcome like we have in New York State, for example, with the bit license. And it doesn't just focus in on what happens with digital assets. The overregulation, the overburdening of businesses, the overburdening of individuals that are attempting to start businesses, or you have the overregulation of Uber drivers. You have the overregulation then of digital asset investors, the overregulation of blockchain companies that are attempting to establish themselves in states like New York, which make it extremely difficult. Let's see. Money bags, in my opinion, content creators for digital assets will have some great opportunities in crypto space in future due to knowledge. I think all of us, from the content creators to the participants, everybody at this stage that is actively involved in one shape or the other in drilling down and providing this groundswell of information really opens up a significant amount of opportunities in this space. I agree with that. I definitely agree. There's so much that can be had. We're just scratching the surface, so we don't even know the direction that we're going to be going in. Overall, there's just so much. It's such a wide open territory. It's really, really impressive what can happen. So anyhow, look, I came up on an hour here. Want to try to keep this to an hour. I did have a few other things to point out, but conclusion of this entire topic, and again, really to show and spotlight how critical the blockchain space is. And this goes back to, it was an article, it appeared in Forbes back in March. And I don't know how this kind of slipped through the scrutiny, but this was March 11th on Forbes.com. This article showed up. IBM cuts credit unions deal for blockchain services in the $1.7 trillion industry. Now, this is reaching out to credit unions. So this is IBM and Denver-based credit union service organization CU Ledger have struck a collaboration deal by which new blockchain-based services will be pioneered to help credit unions provide their members with greater efficiencies and enhanced user experiences. So from every perspective, we're starting to see the integration of technology. The integration of blockchain technology will also bring about the normalcy and the mainstream adoption of digital assets as well. So it's really impressive. It's impressive to see the level at which IBM has been involved, whether you agree with, or you like, or you invest in, you don't invest in, whatever, in Stellar and XLM, that partnership of what they really created, and then seeing IBM, which is one of the antiquated, really one of the dinosaurs of this space. We see them as one of, because, I don't know if they're not necessarily out front as the primary leader in this space, but IBM is definitely taking a leading role in the adoption of blockchain technology overall. And to me, that's super meaningful, because it's going to happen at corporate levels. It's going to keep reaching out. And here we have, let's see here. This is the ONAP, I think, COO at blockchain and crypto marketing agency, Savit, offering financial services are made easier, more transparent, and cheaper by using blockchain. It has quickly become he kind of gets into, but I just think we're starting to see this trend explode. And as you just said, as Moneybags made that statement, we're just seeing the beginnings of it. We're just seeing we're just scratching the surface of the possibilities of what's going to happen. And it's really exciting, to kind of be in the mix, all of us, kind of seeing the economic history unfold. And where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be a year from now? I don't think we really know yet, but imagine 5 years and 10 years down the road, if we think back to, the beginnings of an Amazon or a Netflix or a Google, could we have forecasted, 5-10 years down the road, and really saw, the unbelievable developments that we'd have witness to. So that's it. I'm kind of winding down here. Got another early day tomorrow. I want to wrap up. I truly appreciate you guys for joining on late here, 11 o'clock, but joining on, on a Monday evening with me, with Jeff, the HODL Report on Evening Crypto. I appreciate all of you guys. Appreciate your comments. You guys are just, awesome, really outstanding. Look forward. I'm going to try to get another live stream in on Wednesday. I might not be able to. I'll be traveling. So actually, I'll be traveling at that time. So I definitely won't be on Wednesday. If I don't get on Wednesday, I'll be on either Friday evening or definitely Saturday morning. So until then, look forward to seeing you guys. Have an awesome week, and see you on the next video. Thank you guys again for joining in. Don't forget, keep on hodling your crypto. Hey, glad you guys joined in from Australia. See you guys.